Matthew 27, starting in verse 45. From noon until 3 in the afternoon, darkness came over all the land. About 3 in the afternoon, Jesus cried out in a loud voice, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani, which means, my God, why have you forsaken me? When some of those standing there at the cross heard this, they said, he's calling Elijah. Immediately, one of them ran and got a sponge. He filled it with wine vinegar, put it on a staff, and offered it to Jesus to drink. The rest said, now leave him alone. Let's see if Elijah comes to save him. And when Jesus had cried out again in a loud voice, he gave up his spirit. This is the day that the King of the world died. Gave up his spirit, in the words of the gospel writer Matthew, the one who was God, who was with God in the beginning, the one who put breath in all of us, on this day breathed his final breath. Due largely to the collective trauma of being beaten and whipped and tortured and pierced repeatedly over and over again over the previous 24 hours in the story, all of that takes its final toll on Jesus, and he gives up his life. According to Matthew, the 3 hours leading up to that moment in the story were marked by darkness that came over all the land. Now, historically, we don't know exactly what that means. We don't know if the darkness was caused by some type of extended solar eclipse, if it was just thick, dense, dark cloud coverage. We don't even know if it can be explained by natural means at all. But regardless of how it happened, Matthew's focus here seems to be more on why it happened. Because with all of this, God was communicating something to his people about what was happening to Jesus on the cross in this moment. He was experiencing himself a type of darkness. And that darkness is no doubt what leads Jesus after 3 hours to cry out these words from the cross, my God, why have you forsaken me? Those words are a direct quote from Israel's King David in Psalm chapter 22. And the reason that Jesus quotes that psalm, I think, becomes even more clear when you read the psalm in its full context. So here's the context of that psalm. It says, my God, why have you forsaken me? Why are you so far from saving me, so far from my cries of anguish? My God, I cry out by day, but you do not answer, by night, but I find no rest. Yet you are enthroned as the Holy One. You are the one Israel praises, and you, our ancestors, put their trust. They trusted, and you delivered them. To you they cried out and were saved, and you they trusted and were not put to shame. But I am a worm and not a man, scorned by everyone, despised by the people. All who see me mock me. They hurl insults, shaking their heads. He trusts in the Lord, they say. Let the Lord rescue him. Let him deliver him, since he delights in him. So as it turns out, way more than just the first verse of that psalm applies to Jesus in this moment. Jesus is slowly dying by crucifixion as people look on, many of them mocking him and ridiculing him, saying that they should wait and see if God comes to rescue him down off the cross. None of these people choosing to help Jesus in any way. That's the situation Jesus is in this moment. And so he quotes the words of David at a time in David's life when David was in a similar situation. At a time in his life when he felt like he was left out to dry by God, Jesus adopts David's words to describe what is happening to him in this moment on the cross. And just like in David's situation, the people looking on at the crucifixion, they scorn Jesus, they mock Jesus, they hurl insults at Jesus, they sit back and they say, let's leave him alone, let's see if God comes to help him. Here in this passage, they specifically say, let's wait and see if God sends Elijah, the Old Testament prophet, to save him. They do that because they think Jesus is calling for Elijah in what he cries out in this passage. The word for God and Elijah in the original language are very similar words. But Jesus is not calling Elijah in this moment. He's asking a question. The question being, my God, why have you forsaken me? Now, it's really important that we realize that when Jesus asks God a question, it's never because he doesn't know the answer. Jesus had a perfectly intimate, close relationship with the Father. He's not asking why God has forsaken him because he genuinely doesn't understand why this is happening. He's known that this moment was coming in his life for years. He's asking this question because he wants those who are at the cross that day, and by association, us sitting here today, to wrestle with the answer to that question. My God, why have you forsaken Jesus? And we're going to get to the answer here in just a moment. But first, I just want to let the passage show us a little bit of the answer. So after all of this happened, with one final cry, we're told that Jesus gives up his life. Matthew then begins to describe what happens immediately following Jesus' death. Verse 51 in the passage, at that moment, the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. So the temple curtain in Jesus' day was what separated the holy from the common. No one was permitted to enter through the curtain except for the high priest, who had to participate in all sorts of rituals and precautions just in order for him to do so. The curtain itself was large and it was dense. It was approximately 30 feet tall. It was as thick as the breadth of a man's hand. It was often said that this curtain was so dense, it was so substantial that it would take about 300 priests to move it from place to place. The curtain was substantial because it was a way of visualizing our substantial separation, the separation between us and God because of our sin. But here we're told that in the moment Jesus dies, that curtain is torn from top to bottom. Something about the way that God relates to humanity in the moment Jesus dies on the cross has fundamentally changed. Something has been altered in this moment when it comes to our access to the Father. It's all different now precisely because of what happens to Jesus on the cross. The writer of Hebrews actually sheds some light on this later in the New Testament. It says there, therefore, brothers and sisters, since we have confidence to enter the most holy place by the blood of Jesus, by a new and living way opened for us through the curtain, that is his body. What opened the curtain for you and I was Jesus' body broken on the cross. Because we have Jesus, we no longer need that curtain. He is our access to the Father, once and for all. Specifically, his body is our access to the Father. The author of Hebrews calls this a new and living way for us to relate to God. His body provides the access that the curtain had limited. His body is the bridge over the chasm that is our separation from God due to our sin. His body makes a whole new type of relationship possible. And therefore, the curtain in the temple is done away with. And then this happens, second half of verse 51 in our passage. The earth shook, the rocks split, and the tombs broke open. The bodies of many holy people who had died were raised to life. They came out of the tombs after Jesus' resurrection, and they went into the holy city and appeared to many people. Now, it's a little difficult to follow from the language in the passage. Most likely what Matthew means is that when Jesus died, there was an earthquake, and the rocks split, and some tombs split open. And then 3 days later, at Jesus' resurrection, these unnamed holy people were raised to life from their tombs and they went into the city. Matthew essentially jumps forward in the narrative by a few days in this verse, at which time some people were raised to life along with Jesus. And as fantastical as that might sound to us today, this was God's way of communicating another aspect of what was happening in the death and resurrection of Jesus. He was saying that Jesus' resurrection would be more than just an isolated event. It was his way of showing us that Jesus' resurrection was actually a catalyst for other resurrections. As Paul puts it in 1 Corinthians 15, Jesus was, quote, the first fruits of those who had fallen asleep. The point of Jesus' resurrection, it would seem, isn't that it would be the only resurrection, but rather that it would be the first of many, including yours and mine one day in the future if we know and follow Jesus. But back to that day at Golgotha. Upon simply witnessing the earthquakes and rock splitting, the Roman soldiers present for Jesus' crucifixion, they have a moment of realization. Verse 54, when the centurion and those with him who were guarding Jesus saw the earthquake and all that had happened, they were terrified and exclaimed, surely he was the Son of God. Which means that the first people to publicly, correctly proclaim Jesus' true identity after his death were one of the criminals dying on the cross next to him and the Roman soldiers who facilitated his death. One more time in the Gospel of Matthew, those who shouldn't get it, while those who should get it are nowhere to be found. This is all of what happened the day that the King of the world died. These are the events of Good Friday. And so much about the meaning of this day, the meaning of Good Friday, as I said earlier, I think lies in the answer to the question that Jesus asks as he dies. The question, my God, why have you forsaken me? Jesus' question is simply this, why? And again, Jesus asked that question not because he needs the answer to it, but because you and I need the answer to it. Why does any of this happen on the cross? Why does any of it have to happen? What on earth could possibly be important enough that the God of the universe would turn his back on Jesus? What would be significant enough that God the Father would turn his back on his one and only Son? What could possibly matter that much to God? And the reason we're here tonight is because the answer to that question is us. You matter that much to God. I matter that much to God. Right relationship with us mattered enough to God that he would do all of this to make sure that it was possible. We mattered to the point that he would go to extreme lengths to welcome us home. That is the point of Jesus enduring everything that he endured on the cross. As the hymn that we just sang a moment ago says, how deep the Father's love for us, how vast beyond all measure, that he would give his only Son to make a wretch his treasure. How great the pain of searing loss, the Father turns his face away as wounds which mark the chosen one bring many sons to glory. We are the reason that God would allow this to happen to Jesus. We are the reason that Jesus would choose to endure it. And not only that they would together allow this to happen, but that they together would facilitate it. They would orchestrate it. You see, the sin and the pride of the chief priests and religious leaders, that was instrumental in everything that happened to Jesus. The Romans' national pride and militaristic cruel practices in crucifixion, those things were instrumental in what happened to Jesus, but none of those things were decisive in what happened to Jesus. God could have stopped any of it at any moment had he wanted to. What was decisive is that the Father and the Son had a plan. A plan that would involve allowing Jesus to experience torture, pain, suffering, and death. A plan that would involve Jesus experiencing separation from God. And he experienced that separation so that you and I could have that separation removed for us. Accounted for, dealt with, and done with. The curtain is gone for us because Jesus' body tore it into. This is what makes Good Friday so good for followers of Jesus. Because on this Friday, something was accomplished, something definitive was accomplished, something that makes it possible for us to approach God after our darkest moments, our deepest sins, our biggest failures. Those things in any other type of relationship would lead to distance and barriers and even abandonment, being forsaken by the one that the sin was against. But in Jesus' case, because he was forsaken, you and I get to know that we will never be forsaken. We may feel forsaken like David in Psalm chapter 22, but the truth is that we never are, not for a moment. If you feel a barrier, a thick curtain of sorts between you and God now, there are only two possible explanations for that. Either that curtain is there because you haven't yet trusted in Jesus' body that can tear it all down, or you have trusted in that, and the curtain that you feel is one that you yourself have constructed. And to be sure, you and I sure can construct some curtains. We do it all kinds of different ways. Our shame is a curtain. Our bitterness is a curtain. Our pride, our self-righteousness, our rebellion, our distrust, our anger at life's disappointments. All of those things and more can become curtains, barriers between us and God. But Good Friday is the day that God tore all of those down. There are quite a few ways that we fabricate imaginary curtains in our minds and hearts that keep us out of God's presence. And to be sure, those curtains can seem dense and heavy too. But Jesus is also capable of tearing every single one of those down. We know that because the real curtain has already been torn. It's been removed. The scriptures tell us as much. We know that because of the cross. So this evening and every day as a follower of Jesus, we are invited out of the common and into the holy place. We're invited out of distance and into his presence. And all of that is made possible because of who Jesus is and what he's done on the cross. So we're going to take the rest of this evening together, and we're going to respond to all of these realities. We're going to sing and remember what Jesus did and why. We're going to go to the tables together throughout this room and take communion together, internalizing the bread and the cup that stands for Jesus' body and blood, both broken and shed on the cross that Friday a long time ago for us. And as we do, you are invited to experience the access that all of that has made possible for you, the day that the King of the world died. So I've asked Joe and Jordan to come up and just first sing a song for us that I think narrates the story of Good Friday and the events leading up to it quite beautifully. It's likely not a song that most of us know or have heard before. It's not even really a song to sing along with so much. But as they sing it, I would love for you to just follow along with the lyrics on screen and just spend some time processing and reflecting and thinking on the words to this song, on the events leading up to the day that Jesus died, and on the events that those words describe in this song. And then we'll spend some time singing and celebrating together afterwards. So I'm going to pray for us, and we'll do just that.